Now that the British Empire was in control of the largest poppy producing area in the Indian subcontinent, the East India Company and the English Crown would finally see the solution to an old problem in their relationship with China. The British have in their hands a powerful weapon that will be able to make them the greatest power in the world and that will devastate the richest empire on the planet, China. In today's video, we will see how the British Empire will boost international drug trafficking to a level never seen before in the history of humanity. But before that, don't forget to subscribe and share the video with everyone you know. This is the only real geopolitics channel in Portuguese, and that's why your support is essential so I can keep bringing you content about geopolitics, history, security, and intelligence. My name is Dilion Petri and this is World Geopolitics. Imagine this scenario. A Colombian cocaine cartel, backed by the Colombian government, launches a successful military offensive against Brazil. Then it forces Brazil to legalize cocaine and allow the cartel to import the drug into the 5 largest Brazilian cities, without supervision and without paying taxes. Also imagine that this Colombian cartel forces the traffickers to govern all Colombian citizens operating in these 5 largest cities, and also forces the Brazilian government to pay war reparations worth $100 billion to the Colombian government. If you think that would be absurd, surreal, something beyond the imagination of exaggerated science fiction writers, or that not even the most ridiculous conspiracy theorists could imagine something like that, then get to know the scenario of the Opium Wars in China, fought from 1839 to 1842, and from 1856 to 1860. But in real life, replace the word Colombian cartel with East India Company, Colombia with the British Empire, and Brazil with China. The Opium Wars, conflicts that took place in China in the 19th century involving the British and French colonial powers against the Qin Empire, were wars that have been forgotten or ignored in Western history but are remembered as symbols of Western imperialist domination and have repercussions even today, not only in China but in Asia as a whole. The goal of the colonial powers was to force China to legalize and import opium, a highly harmful narcotic, and to allow the colonial powers to control the Chinese cities where opium was sold. And the reason was simple. Besides China being an obstacle to the European imperial process in Asia, the trade relations were also quite negative. After all, the Chinese were not at all impressed by English industrial products and showed no interest in buying imported goods from Europe. In addition to the protectionism imposed by the Chinese imperial government, which made it difficult for English products to enter, even among the Chinese population, the European products that were coveted in many places around the world were not attractive. And because of this, the Europeans' trade balance, especially that of powerful England with China, was negative. Because if the Chinese were not interested in these European products, the opposite, however, was happening. Chinese products and their exotic appeal were thriving in the major capitals of Europe. But there was an exception. The opium produced in the interior of the Indian subcontinent. This drug was the only thing that could be exported to China on a large scale because there was demand. But there was a problem. It was banned by the Chinese imperial authorities. Opium production in India dates back thousands of years, with the plant being cultivated for medicinal and recreational purposes. But, nevertheless, the history of opium production in India changed drastically in the 19th century when the British Empire began to control and monopolize the production and trade of opium from the Mawa region. The English took something that was religious and medicinal and turned it into an industrial-scale operation to be exported to the entire world. Thanks to English technology and industry, opium production exploded on a colossal scale. And besides that, because it was highly addictive, it created its own demand. Before the arrival of the Europeans, the thugs we mentioned in the previous video were the main underworld force in Mawa. But now, as they were being suppressed, the East India Company began to dominate the region and with that to control the producers and traders in the area. This control of opium production in India by the British Empire was crucial for the growth of international opium trafficking, something that was unprecedented until then. With poppy being cultivated and processed into opium in India, then exported to other countries, including China, through English smugglers who resold it to criminals and Chinese secret societies, especially the Chinese Triads. At that time, the Western industrial powers and China were in conflict due to cultural and commercial differences. While the Westerners sought free trade, regular diplomatic contacts, and resident embassies in China, the Chinese opposed this foreign presence in their country. The main point of tension was the Westerners' insistence on importing opium into China, which was prohibited in Chinese territory, but was growing in the underworld. The Qing court then decided to completely eradicate the opium trade and sent the official Lin Zexu to put an end to this trade in Guangzhou. There he arrested everyone involved, including the foreigners, until they handed over their contraband to be destroyed by the Chinese authorities. Lin also wrote a letter to Queen Victoria requesting the eradication of opium in the British territories in India. In the letter he said, "In countless regions of India under your control, such as Bengal, Madras, Bombay, Patna, Benares, and Mawa, opium has been planted from one hill to another, and reservoirs have been built for its production." The foul odor ascends, vexing the skies and terrifying the spirits. In fact, you, O Queen, can eradicate the cultivation of opium in these places, completely weed out the cultivated fields, and sow the 5 grains in their place. Anyone who dares to try to plant and produce opium must be severely punished. Suppose a man from another country goes to England to trade, he still has to obey English laws, so why shouldn't he also obey the laws of the Celestial Dynasty when in China? The barbarian merchants from your country, if they wish to conduct business in my country for an extended period, must respectfully obey our statutes and permanently cut off the source of opium. However, Lin's letter never reached Queen Victoria. Meanwhile, British public opinion considered Lin's siege of the English community in Guangzhou an unacceptable affront. Supporters of trade with China pressured Parliament to declare war. Palmerston, the then British Prime Minister, wrote a letter to Beijing demanding satisfaction for the offences and insults made against the British Crown and its citizens residing in China. He also demanded the permanent cession of one or more islands on the coast of China to serve as a British trading post. In his letter, Palmerston admitted that opium was considered contraband under Chinese law, but argued that the ban was not fair as it was the result of corruption among Chinese officials. Or, in other words, we only traffic because your authorities are corrupt. Clearly, this argument failed to sway the Chinese government's stance. This led Palmerston to send a fleet to blockade the main Chinese ports, capture vessels, and seize part of Chinese territory until the demanded satisfaction was received. And thus the Opium War would begin. At first, the Chinese considered the British threat unlikely. An official argued before the emperor that the distance would be insurmountable for the British, as their long journey would make the arrival of supplies practically impossible, and their defeat would then be imminent. However, even after the British had blockaded the Pearl River and captured several islands near the city of Ningbo, Lin wrote indignantly to Queen Victoria demanding humility and submission. In other words, the Chinese simply couldn't deal with the reality of their military and technological inferiority, as centuries of supremacy in the region had distorted the Celestial Court's perception of its own superiority. The presumption only served to accentuate the inevitable humiliation. The British ships easily broke through the coastal defenses and blockaded the country's main ports. Cannons that were once disregarded were now powerless in the face of British technology. And so, the Celestial Court was humiliated by the English barbarians. The bitter Chinese request for surrender led the English to demand territorial concessions and a series of indemnities, with the Qin government being forced to pay the British government 6 million silver dollars for the opium that had been confiscated by Lin Zexu. $3 million as compensation for the debts that Canton merchants owed to British merchants, and another $12 million in reparations for the cost of war, which would be paid in installments with an annual interest rate of 5% in case of delay. But what was bad would get worse. With the government demoralized and its authority weakened, secret societies with utopian and messianic visions and organized crime flourished in China. In the following years, the already weakened Chinese government would still face the Taiping Rebellion, which would cost the lives of 20 million Chinese people. And now, in addition to England, the United States and France would also send their ships to take part in the lucrative opium trade. In 1859, the new British envoy, Frederick Bruce, landed in China to exchange ratifications of the previous treaty. However, when he encountered police officers blocking the way, he ordered his group of British Marines to remove the obstacles. But the Chinese forces resisted and defeated the British for the first time. Until then, far from allowing the English to advance, this only served as a pretext for the British to punish China more severely, with the English receiving orders to occupy the capital and force the emperor to accept the new agreements. To do this, the commissioner, Lord Elgin, leader of the English troops, ordered the burning and looting of the emperor's summer palace, making this one of the greatest thefts and acts of destruction of historical heritage in history. In the Second Opium War, not only was China severely weakened, but it was also under a lot of pressure. Now, it wasn't just the English, but also the Americans and French and other European nations. And to the north, the Russian presence was also beginning to appear. The Chinese Empire was heading toward its agony, and with the military defeat, the Western powers imposed even more humiliating conditions on the Chinese, with the trade and consumption of opium now being forcibly legalized in China. The legalization of opium in China gives us a historical example of the consequences of drug legalization. The drug would now spread in an epidemic manner, causing mass addiction. The number of people getting sick because of drug use exploded. Because opium use led to health problems such as respiratory failure, brain damage, and large-scale memory problems in the population. Since opium is a depressant drug, that is, those who use it lose the will and interest to do anything other than consume the drug itself. China began to lose a huge amount of labor for its economy, both due to drug use and the diseases that came from it. This led to a drop in production, especially food production, and as a consequence, inflation and poverty. The forced legalization of opium also further weakened China's political authority, allowing organized crime to now dominate entire territories, and soon generals commanding corrupt soldiers and criminals began to emerge, increasing crime to levels never before seen in world history. China, then the richest nation in the history of the planet up to that point, went through a series of economic, social, and political crises, causing it to reach levels of poverty, hunger, and destruction in just 90 years that were practically biblical. Very few times in history has such a rich and powerful nation declined so quickly to such deep levels. What invading armies couldn't do in the past, drugs sponsored by the British government were now able to destroy the Middle Kingdom China. However, among the criminal groups that emerged during this period, one in particular deserves special attention. The secret society of the Chinese Triads, based mainly in Hong Kong and Guangdong. The Triads would soon innovate. Before, they were just intermediaries between European traffickers and Chinese drug users. Now they would increase not only their economic capital but also their political capital. The Triads gradually spread throughout Southeast Asia, controlling not only the opium market, but also the equally lucrative human trafficking market, especially of Chinese laborers. And furthermore, the Triads soon realized they could push the Europeans out of the drug trafficking business itself, taking control of the opium-producing areas in the regions of Nepal, the Himalayas, and Indochina. In just a few years, the Triads increased opium production so much that the price plummeted, crashing the opium economy in the region of India, and since the regions of Nepal, the Himalayas, and Indochina were beyond the reach of the East India Company, the Europeans couldn't do anything about it, and from the routes inside the Asian continent, the Chinese Triads would now partner with another organization of Chinese people living outside China, the so-called Tongs, who were spread throughout Chinese communities in the United States, England, and continental Europe. With this international partnership, the Triads, who controlled both the opium trafficking routes and industrial-scale production, soon changed the economic reality of drug trafficking. China, which until then had been the largest importer of opium, would now become the largest exporter of opium. And soon this product that addicted and victimized the Chinese people began to be found in large quantities in cities like London, Manchester, Birmingham, Paris, New York, and San Francisco as well. The spell was now turning against the sorcerer, and with that, the Europeans' trade balance with China was once again at risk of becoming negative. And to make matters worse, it was all because of a product that was now bringing problems to the major cities in the West. What was the Western response? Ironically, it was to pressure China to criminalize and ban the opium trade again. In other words, before, the Europeans had pressured China to open up the trade because it was advantageous for them, but now that the drug was starting to addict Europeans, they wanted China to ban it. However, now it was too late and the monster was already out of the cage. The Chinese Triads thus established the first major global drug trade network, which would inspire various criminal factions around the world. But after all, who was this Chinese secret society called the Triads? And that we'll leave for the next episode of the series, The History of Organized Crime. Thank you all, I hope you enjoyed it, and a mega, hyper, super thank you to the channel members. Consider becoming a channel member to access exclusive content such as courses, live streams with me, and participation in our Telegram group. And if you can't become a channel member, that's okay, you can still help the Geopolitica Mundial channel by sharing this video with everyone you know. Hugs and see you next time.